it's a space where I've been able to grow, to understand, to learn, to accept, to to listen, to be vulnerable. To me, it's like hope.
I mean, I'm so pleased that this sort of organisation exists.
Yeah.
That young people are being brought together and talking about activism and things. Whereas it was the sort of thing we did in grubby back rooms and each other's sitting rooms and things.
Yeah.
I felt that just, the personal was political, just living as an out lesbian. When I first came out, I thought I was the only one in the world. This is before the internet, before any representation on television, on film. This is why I'm really interested in your project, because the whole kind of thing about invisibility.
Legally Black is a campaign to highlight the issues of underrepresentation and misrepresentation of black people in the media. So what we did is that we turned iconic film and TV posters from all white characters to all black characters and put it on bus stops.
I really got involved in activism and shouting quite a lot when Clause 28 was announced. And I went on all the marches and I wrote to my MP and I talked to everybody about it. And unfortunately we lost. I felt utterly defeated. And in that defeat I thought, what are we going to do now? My girlfriend at the time had the idea that we'd join the Pride Committee.
Yeah.
Because it was, marching, shouting. It was very much a political, community organised event then.
For me, Black Pride I feel like is important because the Black LGBTQ+ community, I feel like they can be ostracised a lot. A part of me does feel invisible even within the black community, but I feel like I have pride in who I am, and that's what makes me feel included. Like I include myself into those spaces, and I don't feel as invisible as I used to, for example. When you go to Pride, for me, you just have that kind of feeling. I don't think it's explainable. I feel like this sense of fulfillment, it's pride. Like you feel good, because everybody's having a good time, everybody's happy. It's like an amazing safe space where literally everyone can come together.
Peter Presland, in his book, called it a space to breathe, a space to be yourself.
Well, I mean, with being black, there's you have that kind of culture that you cherish so much, and I feel like that culture is more brought out in Black Pride than it is in Pride. Especially with things like masculinity, you're always told to hold back. You're always told to be strong and be manly. When I was in Black Pride, all of that was thrown out the window.
Yeah.
It's just freedom. Yeah.
There used to be lesbian strength marches, which sounds like a ridiculous name. What's strong about us lesbians? And one year, it was due to start off at Charing Cross, and I found out the NF, the National Front, so major kind of fascist organisation, was having a march along the same route half an hour earlier. And I thought, shit, no, what's this going to be like, Turned out there were 60 of them and they were long gone before the 2,000 of us turned up. Okay. That's the strength, it's the numbers thing, numbers. It's the being in the majority. It's
power as well.
Yeah.
The black struggle kind of resonates with the gay struggle in that sense where, society makes us feel invisible. And, we feel like we have no place in the world.
To see yourself represented or to hear about people like you doing different things gives you hope, gives you possibilities, lets you know it's acceptable, lets you know it's possible.
Fujiyama.
Yeah.
So we took over.
Okay.
So we've kind of made it like our activist hub. That's where everything goes down for advocacy. And before we were really nomadic with it, but now we have our own place.
And that gives you freedom, doesn't it?
100%.
You can develop your ideas, your thoughts.
It's given me a voice, so I can fight the injustice that I see. And the place has given me just a second home where I can truly be free.
So how much did the squatters movement influence how much work you could achieve?
This was a lace making shop, and the lady who had the lace making shop said, I'll tell you when I'm going to leave, and so you can then take over my property. And she told us when she could leave, and literally we broke through the middle wall here. Yes, and we squatted, and that's how we moved into here. So squatting allowed us to make the changes that we wanted to. In the house I lived in, eventually I met the owner, and he came to myself and my husband after the 81 riots and said to us, no one is ever going to want to live in Brixton. Make me an offer for this house and you can have it. And we said £6,000, and he said no, 7, and we bought the house.
You bought a house for £7,000?
On Mill Road, 112.
How much is it worth now?
$1 million.
This is us laughing and we can never afford a house in London. Gentrification.
I guess I didn't see it on the vast scale like rent and stuff, because that doesn't really affect me. Or like the minute scales like prices and like local chicken and chip shops going up. That's what really affects me the most. Because like that's what some kids rely on for dinner. And if they can't even afford that and this is their home, what are they really supposed to eat?
£2 for wings and chips.
I was like, what? Without a drink?
Now it's going up to £3.50.
I got involved in my campaign because in school we had to do our IT coursework, and to do that you obviously require a computer, but my mum didn't have the financial resources to get me a new laptop. So everybody went in school, they're like, yeah, I've done my coursework, and I hadn't done my coursework. And I didn't feel like the confidence to tell a teacher about my like situations at home and stuff. She like literally just labelled me as a disgrace in front of the whole class. So I joined the academy basically so the future of like the education system, like students won't have to go through what I went through, and also like my kids won't have to go through what I went through, because no one should really experience that. I wanted to know more about the Brixton Uprising. Can you tell me like what started it and what happened during the uprising?
Before the uprising, there was a lot of police oppression in the area, and the Brixton police decided in its wisdom that it would introduce something called Operation Swamp. And as you walked up and down what was the front line into main Brixton, they would stop everybody. But what triggered it was a young man, I think his name was Ben. He was stopped and searched at the very top of Relton Road, and the police attempted to arrest him, and he fought the police. And then the whole place erupted. And it was a vicious riot, and it was targeted. It wasn't just people burning and looting, which is what people think. There was a pub called the George, which wouldn't serve black people. So they burnt down the George. They hijacked a bus, which was probably my highlights. The thing about the insurrection in Brixton is that it had 100% support of the community in Brixton. So the collective was 8 women and 6 men. So you wake up in the morning and your whole life is devoted to what you believe in. That is a very, very powerful feeling, very powerful feeling. You know, we've probably got 4 or 5 campaigns on the go. We've got a magazine to bring out. We've got interviews to do. The other feeling, of course, is that we believe Brixton belong to us. So my joy would be getting my bag and go for a walk in Brixton and knowing everybody, saying hello, going to sign on to get my £30. I must say my husband's sister worked in the dole office, so it was quite easy. I didn't have to queue up to get my £30. So a feeling of being completely in control of your own agenda and your own life. So it's just a feeling of freedom, of liberation, really.
Like when I started campaigning at like the Advocacy Academy, feeling like, wow, I can actually like do this, I can actually create change. It makes you feel empowered, like you are ready, and all you need to start is just passion, and we have the passion, so we can make change.
I'm drunk and say I'm mad, they say I'm crazy and say I'm bad, but I'm okay, cause I think I'm gay, rock and roll, okay, tra-la-la-la-la-la, I'm drunk and say I'm mad. I came to London in '69, and I was gay then, met up lots of other gay people who told me about 78 Railton Road being a community, the first community centre, gay community centre in London, and it was a squat. They had arguments with council in order to try and keep that gay centre open, but there were too many people complaining about it with noisy music and things like that. They used to dance in the basement.
I was going to say, was it noisy or was it just...
Well, it wasn't that noisy, but
Yeah.
it was probably late. And we had little, a theatre group called Brixton Fairies.
Yeah.
And they did little plays and things.
Growing up, I wasn't very feminine. Or some people always speculated that I'm a lesbian. I remember one time me and my sister got into an argument and I was like, you're dumb. She's like, you're stupid. I'm like, you're fathead. She's like, you're gay. I'm like, what? What? I was like, we're in the middle of argument. Why are you even saying that? She's like, aren't you gay? I was like, no. And I wasn't sure. I've always wondered about my sexuality and even just like me as a person, because being called a girl or princess, all these kind of things was just so offensive to me, because I was like, I'm hard, I'm bad, I'm a boy. I remember when I was a kid I wanted to be a boy and that kind of stuff. I've always been aware of the privilege of being allowed to express myself like that. Do you identify as queer?
I was just saying
You just say gay. My friends like oh my, they're like, every day these people add a new thing to their title, and I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, it's LGBT, what is it next? And then basically I did this joke where like I list every single one, and I'm like, asexual, intersex, questioning, queer, and they're just like, what?
too much.
Do you think it's too much? Do you think so?
I'm too old to think about sex anymore.
No, that's a very ageist statement there.
What?
Ageist statement.
Anyway, I don't really think about it.
Do you see your work in terms of like gay rights? Not as done, but like
It sort of feels like it's all done in a way, but there's still people being attacked, like those two women who were attacked on a tube.
Yeah. That leads to a question about Brixton. A lot of people associate it with the Jamaican community, the Caribbean community. I know I do, and that's purely because I open my front door and I walk down Railton Road. I'm going to see the friends of my parents. But you guys were there, you existed, you still exist. So you felt welcome when you came to Brixton?
Well, I mean, eventually people got used to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was lots of squatting going on down this street. It was because there was a compulsory purchase order on parts of the street. Here they were going to widen the road, but they ran out of money, or it never happened.
Yeah.
So that's why lots of squatters moved in. Eventually came some arrangement with Lambeth to pay a small amount of money, like £3 a week rent or something. But we became a housing co-op in 1978.
So through the squatting is how you became?
I mean, it's through the squatters. First we called ourselves Brixton Gay Community Housing Co-op, but we combined with other people in the area and formed Brixton Housing Co-op.
This is all, learning about you is just all new stuff to me.
Yes, and what's this, the activism with the young girls in Jamaica?
When I got to like university, my friends in Jamaica, they got to university, we started to realise that we grew up in a very like bad environment to be a young girl. So I got like a bunch of my friends who are from different places, Trinidad, Tobago, Dominica, Antigua, to send me videos of them talking about what's it like to be a woman in the Caribbean, and what they think of feminism, what do they think of toxic masculinity, what do they want the Caribbean community outside of the Caribbean, so here in the UK, in the States, that kind of stuff, what can they do to help?
Sounds like a hard job.
It's a hard job, and I kind of love it, but I kind of hate the word activist, but it's something that I plan to dedicate my life to do.
so important to you?
I came here before 2 years. I love it. I want to come every week to improve my language, to mix with the people, different culture.
Key thing is about doing something together, because you get to know people without even realising you're doing it.
I felt a bit useless. Like, at this time of my life, it felt like, well, most people are going to start thinking about retiring, you know, and I'm kind of creating a new life, and this place has supported me. So it feels like something's growing, and maybe 2 years ago or even a year ago, I couldn't see out of where I was. It was quite dark. I had a question, which was why you would have chosen the farm as being like activism.
You talked about it being a place that gives you a sense of belonging, gives you a place to connect with people in your community, and that in a sense is making change.
I could say that in the old days, probably activism for me meant doing something very active. Brixton Common came in the mid-80s. Lots of protests around military bases where people knew there were nuclear weapons. I've done that, you know, breaking into military bases and jumping up and down and getting arrested and all that sort of thing. I think that's what activism used to mean to me. Now I would say, yes, coming to the garden, I would say is social action, it's activism, because it's doing something for your community.
For me, activism is like, it's something that should kind of like seep into like every aspect of your life. I don't know, this is gonna sound really dumb because it's not really political, but just like noticing that like the plants like outside your block aren't being watered properly, and then you just like go out and do it yourself.
I think it's taking responsibility, not just thinking it's going to be done by someone else.
I always used to think that in the future, if I was to have children, would I want them to live in this world? And that used to lead me to think about all the things that I thought was wrong with the world. And I thought that the educational system, would I really want to put my children through all of that to become just another face in the crowd? Even if, let's say, students were just 20% of our current population, they're still 100% of our future. And the fact that they're not being trained or taught efficiently or in the best ways to help them take control of their future, which is our future, is just really, it's just my major pet peeve. Not even a pet peeve, it's just like a major axe I want to grind.
One of my biology teachers, rather than having a normal biology lesson learning about like the structure of like glucose as a molecule or whatever, she just taught us about self-care. So I talked to her about how I was feeling and what I was going through, and I opened up about my suicidal thoughts. And after that, I was passed on to the sixth form team, who were less effective, to say the least. They never really tried to understand how they could best help me. I just wasn't comfortable like moving forward with my life, knowing that there are so many other people who are in my situation. That's why I co-founded Crazy Talk. Yeah. There is a youth mental health crisis in London. We went down to Westminster Bridge and we made these kind of like dummies, I guess. We made one for each young person that had committed suicide the year before. And we tried to use it as a way to facilitate the meaningful conversation that we had in mind.
Well, I suppose the biggest part of mental health problems is that isolating yourself. The way it's seen, like medically, is that it's something permanent. That when you come together with people, you realise everyone has these issues.
Community projects where people can come along, find a role, make things happen, change things, actually gives back people's feeling of power, that they can actually do things. And I think that's been lacking because of what's happening in national government and other things, where we're all beginning to feel helpless and that we can't actually determine anything anymore. And this garden is a really good example of it.
So my mum made this for my birthday, and it's a cyanotype of the Aylesbury estate. I grew up in Elephant and Castle. The Haygate's gone, it's been demolished, and Aylesbury, like, they're also having the same problems. And so yeah, I bought it as like a object of solidarity, I guess. Elephant and Castle, like when I was growing up there, had such a massive soul that I just feel like it's just gradually being taken further and further away. It's the same as in Brixton, like the soul is just like being replaced by like empty cartons, like Box Park and Elephant Park.
Before they knocked down, I think it's the Haygate that goes on to Old Kent Road. I've got a friend who lives in Bermondsey, and we're just kind of walking around there, and it was all pretty much boarded up, but we managed to get in. And I think there was 1 or 2 people still living in houses who were refusing to move. We got over, and it was like kind of a biosphere, you know.
How did you get in?
I think we just climbed over a wall.
Really?
Yeah. But I thought it was really beautiful.
When I got offered the place at Cressingham, I was over the moon. At some point during that time, I'd actually had a text from someone I know who's been very, very active in housing. Hi Anne, heard you're moving to Cressingham. Do you know about the demolition?
Oh my
gosh. And I was like, had a little bit of a manic defence response to the situation, and just thinking, I'm just going to go there, I'm going to fight.
Did you feel really angry?
I felt scared, and I felt angry with Lambeth that they would put a person who they knew from their own records was bipolar into a precarious situation. So I was absolutely furious with the council for that.
But it's like, it's horrible because it's like the one place where you're meant to feel the most stable, most safe, most secure, and you can't even come home and feel that.
Some of the activism that we have done has kind of given us a huge amount of strength, but it's just the amount of energy that it sucks out of you sometimes. I mean, I think there was a period where we just used to have meetings about it all the time, and I used to come down in my dressing gown and my pyjamas and like come into the room and go, I'm absolutely fed up of having to come to meetings about where I live.
You know, we all went to the town hall on the very first demo, and some of the banners said no social cleansing, and I remember thinking, I think that's going a bit far. I don't think that's what we're up against. But actually, as time went on and as I learned, I thought, actually, it really is social cleansing.
But I think it's a byproduct, though, don't you? The social cleansing. I think initially, all the stuff is just about the money.
It's like a byproduct, but also it feels very purposeful as well. It feels because like money, that's who it brings. I think that like a lot of these flats are being demolished for luxury flats that like are not social housing, that like people like us can't afford to live in. Yeah, especially when you're knocking down like people's restaurants, businesses, you're forcing these people out. I think it's I can't see it as a byproduct. I see it as very purposeful.
So it is absolutely deliberate, because when they come out with the word social mix, and we all said, well, we've got one, thank you very much. Yeah, exactly. Basically, they want to water down working class people because they think working class people are basically all going to drag each other down.
So what is actually happening here right now?
We made an application for a right to manage and a right to transfer. And the right to manage just means we can look after the repairs and the maintenance of the estate, which we've won. We've now got a letter from the Secretary of State supporting the right to transfer, so it's absolutely massive. Yeah, it would mean that we could implement the People's Plan. I feel like there's this kind of army of love out there. The very old-fashioned view of struggle was a kind of mass strike and a mass this and a mass that. But I think also in smaller struggles, you know, we have a space to dream, if you like, about maybe not what a better world is, but what a better estate is, and if you have a better estate, if you have better homes, all that to me is a very concrete example of building a better world.
Mm-hmm. Knowing that, like, the community of people that want change and want more isn't as small as the people that, you know, the army of love, right? And it's like, actually, it's massive, and there are a lot of people like who want to see change in a lot of the same areas as you. And so, like, I think conversations like these make me feel hopeful.
When I found out that there was actually like a Latin woman like you that was actually doing activism from before, I was very kind of surprised and interested and obviously excited because, well, first of all, she's from my estate, from Brixton, both Latina, both women.
How did you get involved with activism?
With me, I've always kind of been angry about certain social issues, but I didn't really know how to kind of use the anger for good, because there's no point of just being angry about something if you're not willing to put the action in it to kind of change it. To you, what does it mean being a Latin American activist?
You know, the Latin American community in Brixton was really Colombian and Ecuadorian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I always felt like connected to it, but not part of it.
Yeah.
I got in touch with the history of kind of Black activism and the political philosophy of Black activism, and I felt very close to that. Maybe in the Latin American community, I didn't have the same political common ground.
So, for example, with Olive Morris, like, what made you kind of want to preserve her legacy?
At the beginning, it was just curiosity, because I thought, you know, who's this woman?
Yeah.
I think I quite liked the fact that she was a very kind of contemporary activist. It wasn't based on representation. No? She wasn't like a leader that would speak for others. She was a grassroots organizer, and she would never occupy a position of representing others. I felt very inspired by that.
¿Quieres hablar en español?
Bueno.
¿Sí? ¿Qué cree que hace Brixton especial con el activismo?
Hay como dos tradiciones políticas que conviven en Brixton. Una es la de los inmigrantes caribeños, esa lucha antirracista, que es como increíble. O sea, es una gente que tiene esa inmigración que llegó en los años 50 con una dignidad tremenda, y que se encontraron con una situación de hostilidad bestial, y cómo ellos se organizaron en torno como a la defensa de sus derechos. Y el otro es como toda esa tradición más vinculada quizás al movimiento de squad, como una tradición política más de la clase trabajadora inglesa, y esas dos cosas juntas y articuladas le dan como ese carácter muy combativo, ¿no? ¿Cómo está el barrio?
El barrio está lo mismo, no ha cambiado tanto.
Vivía mucho en el barrio, o sea, yo hacía toda mi vida ahí. Yo siempre participé mucho, y eso es algo que realmente yo descubrí en Brixton, como eso de local politics. Tell me, how are things now in South London? What are the issues?
Oh, there's a lot. Where do I begin? Right now, there's a lot of issues regarding gang violence and gang culture and stuff. So, but I think also just a more general issue in Brixton, like in particular, is like gentrification. The prices are just crazy, and so they're evicting a lot of people. Am I gonna have the chance to actually stay here, or like belong here, or afford to live here? It was like 3 or 4 or even 5 like Latin American shops. There was a butcher's and just a lot of Colombian restaurants, but now it's turned into Sports Direct that are just taking away the whole culture of Brixton. And it's sad because that's where your family used to go and shop and stay, but not anymore. ¿Y usted qué piensa del futuro de Brixton?
No sé, eso preguntas para vos.
Pues en estos momentos creo que ya no hay tanta diversidad como había antes, entonces no sé si todavía la esencia cultural va a quedar, pero creo que la historia todavía queda.
So welcome everyone, and thanks for joining this Q&A that we put together to discuss We the People, which is a documentary film about the past and future of activism in Brixton, in South London. So this Q&A is pre-recorded and will last approximately 25-30 minutes. But when it goes live, myself and one of the artists will be there to ask any questions that you might have in response to what has emerged. We the People was one of the earliest initiatives that we commissioned as part of Curated London, which is a Museum of London contemporary collecting program. So Curated London is a program funded by the Arts Council and intends to put people's knowledge and experience at the very heart of the collecting process. So every year we run a number of projects around the city by working collaboratively with communities and individuals whose stories are not presently reflected in our collection. So there will be a chance to ask questions about Curated London if you're interested in finding out more during the Q&A. But first I want to introduce you to our panelists that are here today with us. So we're very delighted to be joined by Fan Sissoko and Virginia Nimarkoh, who are the artists behind We the People, the ones that conceived the We the People project. So Fan Sissoko is a participatory designer and researcher. She works with charities and public sectors to improve a health and care system, but she's also an artist whose work revolves around storytelling. Virginia Nimarkoh is an artist, a social entrepreneur, and an activist based in Brixton, and she co-directed We the People. We're also very happy to be joined by Martin Banjo, who is one of the advocates behind the project. Martin is an activism filmmaker based in Southwark, and he helped behind and in front of the camera with the people. And it is also a pleasure to have Marcelo Sanchez Camus, who goes by as Marcelo. Marcelo is the co-founder and organizer of Social Art Networks, which is a UK-wide association of creative professionals dedicated to socially engaged work. And Marcelo's own artistic practice also incorporates community co-authorship into installations, performance, and text. So what we'll be doing is to discuss a few questions in relation to the We the People that you will see. You will see some of the images being edited in our Q&A, and then hopefully we will be able to explore some of the broader sorts of questions concerning social practice, also with the help of Marcelo that is here with us today. I just would like to first start with Fan and Virginia, really, and ask you, how did you come up with the idea of a documentary about activism in Brixton, and why Brixton?
Why Brixton is quite easy to answer. So me and Virginia have known each other for quite a long time, and we've both lived in Brixton for quite a while, and we were both at a place where we just couldn't really imagine living anywhere else in London. And I think that's because we've been involved in community in different ways, mostly through food, mostly working around food justice issues. And we just find that Brixton has like a special flavor in terms of, not in terms of just the community, but in terms of the fact that a lot of things happen there, and there is a lot of activism going on there. And people just tend to have a kind of do-it-yourself attitude where they just kind of make things happen in their community. And so we really wanted to capture that spirit of kind of resistance and rebellion, but also of creativity. And it's also like the reason why we decided to do it now at this moment is also because that is kind of under threat by gentrification. So we over the last few years, we've kind of witnessed the community changing a lot. And some of these initiatives kind of losing ground in Brixton. So that's the motivation behind the film.
Virginia, do you have anything to add to this? It would be interesting also to have your perspective.
Yeah, sure. For me also, Brixton has been this kind of home of activism, whether it's from the Brixton Uprising, the housing, the squatting movement. It seemed to be this kind of nexus for lots of different activity. And so some of the projects that we involved were things that inspired us over the years. So we're always having these conversations about not just Brixton, but the project initially was about Lambeth in general, and about the fact that it was this place where a lot of things happen, there's a lot of social action that goes on, and people have, like as Fan has said, this kind of do-it-yourself ethos, mentality, and drive. And if people don't see something happening, there's something lacking in the community, someone somewhere will invent it or create it. And that seems to be something that's just almost like in the air of Brixton and Lambeth. So it was something that we wanted to try and capture.
And I think it comes across really nicely in the film, in fact. And I think that also there is a question. One of the elements that I found personally most interesting of the film, one of the most interesting aspects of the film, are the intergenerational testimonies. So what difference can you see between older and younger activists? Martins, maybe this is also something that you would have a point of view upon.
Yeah, I do think there's actually quite a lot of differences between older and younger activists, and not just in Brixton. You see it on a much wider scale, even just recently with the George Floyd and Rayshard protests. I think one thing a lot of young people need, which a lot of older activists have is unity and a sort of something to bring them together to actually take action, because we have a lot of voices, especially on social media and all of that. A lot of young people want change, but there's not something to hold them together a lot of the time to actually push them forward and do that, which is something I feel that the older generation had. Maybe it was because it wasn't, the resistance to social media wasn't as predominant, and they were able to just get together in the communities and do it as well. But I think that's something the younger generation definitely lacks.
Yeah, I think it came across quite a lot in how we were engaging with the different participants as well. Just the fact that I suppose the older activists, a lot of them had their own maybe personal archives that they could bring to the project. So, for example, in the conversation with Claire and Shadane, Claire had a lot of ephemera and just I suppose the passage of time as well, but physical items that would kind of show this solidarity or show the activism. So whether it was posters and badges and flyers, all this kind of material, which I suppose gave a sense of solidarity and a sense of identity and a way of promoting a particular cause, but also that had been kept over those years. And that was something that with younger activists, it's less evident, because the way that they share their activism is through social media and through much more sort of transitory methods. So that became quite apparent in the ways that they operated, and specifically things like we worked with Clovis Salmon, who's a local art activist who has been documenting the life in Brixton for over 40 years, and he has this archive of Super 8 material and video material. And again, it's a different time when I guess the sense of needing to create your own archive was a lot more important to people. So people have these kind of personal archives, and that was something that we wanted to bring into the film as well. So there were these layers of discussion that were not just the verbal, or not just the verbal. So there was this sort of visual archive as well.
I'm just going to feedback quickly. I think that was one of the incredible strengths of the film as well, was the hands presenting the tangible archives. Partially because we're becoming more and more removed from tangible archives as we archive everything digitally. And also the witnessing of an oral tradition of storytelling and history building, and how powerful that is, because we can read about things, we can research them online, but when somebody who lived a moment shares it with you, it's a much different experience. And it is so much of who we are as human beings through that learned oral tradition. And I loved watching that in the film. I loved being witness to it. It felt like a really humbling moment to participate in.
I mean, I love going to archives, and I love sorting through just lots of boxes of material. So I had a real field day during that part of the project, but just finding out from different people that they had these archives. Like, so I'm a member of Brixton Housing Co-op, and I found out in one of our meetings that Honey Salvadori, who's a local photographer, is also part of the co-op and had this archive of material that we were able to use. So, there are these kind of, then, it involved me going around to see her and go through her archive with her, go through her computer, look at her. She's even got a wet darkroom in her flat, so all of these things that I wouldn't have necessarily known, maybe because of the film. So the film kind of opened up an opportunity to kind of connect with people in different ways, and having access to people's lives in different ways, like going to see Malcolm Watson at his flat and spending the afternoon with him, and him showing material that he had collected over the years. So yeah, it was very heartening and rewarding to kind of get these kind of insights that we wouldn't normally have had.
I think one thing that was really beautiful to witness as well, in terms of the intergenerational aspect of the film, was all the participants had a kind of connection to Brixton, but they also all had their own kind of geography or their own memory of it. And it was very nice to see how, for example, in the conversation between Malcolm and Gemma, they kind of walk down Railton Road, and Malcolm is showing what used to be the first gay community centre in London to Gemma, who's lived there kind of most of her life and who's really familiar with Brixton, and really anchored in the neighbourhood, but who had no idea that this was there. So there was a kind of exchange also in terms of like just showing the buildings that have disappeared and what's their history and how it, it's not there today anymore, but that memory lives in the people who've taken part. And that's kind of that, I guess, fragility that we wanted to show as well in the film.
And I think that, Fan, you're totally right. It is also particularly important for museum because the recording and collecting of this intangible heritage, which is increasingly under threat in cities in particular, is almost becoming a duty of city museums collecting activities. Some of you already touched upon this, but I would like to dig deeper on questions around the process that I'm sure that Martins will also be able to help us with, to untangle a little bit more, because obviously the process is often one of the most rewarding but also complicating and less talked about aspects of this kind of participatory work. So can I just ask you, what do you think are the most interesting challenges and aspects of We the People as a process?
To be honest with you, I have to say is watching all the people we brought in, all the activists, especially from the older generation, because every time you hear about these people, whether it's in the news or you see them on camera and films and stuff, you think, wow, these people are amazing, they're doing amazing stuff and all of that. And it sort of makes you want to get behind the cause. But actually seeing the people in person, realising that, yeah, they're actually just normal people, just like you, who are trying to get something done. I feel that is a lot more inspiring than what you see on screen. And the process of how they work, how they carry themselves, you see all of that off screen as well, and is, for any young activist like myself, is quite inspiring. So that was one of the processes I was most interested to, just talking to everybody off screen, behind camera. And yeah, that was quite a rewarding experience for me.
We're working with Tom Ross Williams from the Advocacy Academy, and they played a crucial role in bringing the advocates together. They were the lead with the creative workshops that we did, and that provided a really, really important link with the young people. It was a real kind of collaborative process. So Tom acted as a kind of facilitator, and also for ourselves, we had our own process of going through not just the material, but the things initially that we wanted to discuss, but then through a process of workshopping, we worked with the young people, and they basically determined the format of the film and what the main things, the things that they were really interested in. For example, things like gentrification that we saw around us. They came out of a process of conversations with them and workshops.
Also, just to add to that, I think another biggest difficulty of this whole thing was actually deciding, Virginia was saying, what sort of aspects of activism we wanted to focus on, but also who we wanted to bring in, because we talked about how much stuff there is going on in Brixton and how many activists there are, and who would be the most important and influential people to bring in and spread the message we're trying to get across of We the People. I think that was probably one of the most challenging parts of planning the whole We the People film.
I was wondering about that in terms of a film that's so rich and it has so many varied voices and so many different strands of intersectionality represented, how do you make the choice? Because ultimately you tell a story, and when you tell a story, you have to edit, and that's tough. How do you do it? How, you know, what are the decisions that you make? And if there was a behind the scenes bit of the DVD that I could watch, what didn't make it that, you would have loved to have included?
I mostly worked on the edit, so that's a really good question, and that was a really interesting process that we actually didn't have a lot of time to do, which in a way is kind of good because it forced us to make some choices. And as you say, it's a very multi-layered story, and we wanted to say a lot and we wanted to represent a lot. And I think the story kind of came together when we decided that actually the thread that was holding it together was Brixton. Like, it's almost like Brixton becomes the main character. And everyone else in there is kind of contributing to that story. And I guess it's another of the main thread is like the tension between like what do you keep and what do you remember, and then what's under threat and how can you kind of salvage it. There was a lot of choices that we had to make in the edit, but also in the pre-selection of how we would go and talk to, and that was a process that, we contacted a lot of people. We had a really long list of maybe 40 or so activists that we wanted to talk to originally. And talking to the Advocacy Academy, talking to the activists themselves, that kind of matching process sort of came organically. It was a lot of coordination and communication, mostly from Virginia, actually.
Yeah, and I think one of the other challenges was that we were able to bring together these two groups of people that kind of operate on different time frames as well. So I think the young people operate on a very short time frame, and then the older people operate on a much longer time frame, so you could give them a couple of weeks notice, and then the younger people, it was almost like you'd give them a couple of days notice. So it was really trying to navigate these different time zones that people operate under and synchronize them in certain ways. So there was a challenge there, but we made it.
You also asked what was rewarding, and I think it's when we because when we matched up people, they hadn't met each other before. So the first time that they were meeting each other was on camera. And that was really lovely for us to witness how it just happened and how they just connected and didn't need much of our help to kind of facilitate or introduce. That was just a lovely moment of connection for each of the conversations.
So what you're seeing in the film, each person will have just met on that day. So there was very little kind of second shoot. So we just had one session on that day, and there was a little bit of orientation and people feeling comfortable together. But people seem to find ways to connect very easily and feel comfortable with each other as well. And that was probably, again, part of the process of working with Tom and their input, and also how we had prepared for the sessions as well. But I felt really heartened by the sense of warmth and informality that kind of came out of the conversations.
That's great. Thank you. I think that's and it really, really, really comes across in the film. So I guess that's there's lots of other elements that I'm sure that will be unpacked in the Q&A from that will follow up this panel discussion. I was wondering if also with the help of Marcelo, we could unpack more general questions to do with social practice that are, you know, that kind of frame in a way the film, because, you know, social practice has a long track record of activism. To an extent, we can be said that social practice itself is a form of activism. But conversely, and this is a hot topic in museum, not everyone agrees that museum should be sites of activism. What would you say to convince the skeptics? Perhaps I will first ask Marcelo to address this question, because I know that he also has experiences in working in museums.
Really good question. I think that there is some very real tension there in terms of wanting the kinds of visibility that will bring the museum support and the kind of funding that museum support will bring to something like a film, We the People, or any other work that is socially engaged and also highlights the work of communities and activists. At the same time, the tension there is that there is a fear around being co-opted by institutions which are historically part of a dominant white power structure built on colonialism and racism. Now, we are in a time where we're trying to redefine those terms and change them. And it's a very difficult process. It's a difficult process for those who are on the outside as artists and practitioners, many of whom will never work with a museum. And it's difficult for museums themselves because I think many of them don't know where to start or how to do it. There are a few good examples of how it can be done. I believe We the People is one of those examples. And the reason is because it is very clear that the participants and the artists who made this project possible have put first and foremost the voice of the people they are representing. It doesn't feel like somebody's speaking for them. So it feels very authentic and ethical in terms of engagement. I think there's two ways in which to rewrite this system. And one is to create different models of cultural production, different ways in which we don't actually have to tap into the museum sector at all. And I think a lot of artists are doing that. And then another way is to try to change it by working with the museum sector through the work that you might bring into the museum, by making sure that the work that you bring highlights the right kinds of voices. And they're both very valid and really important. And I think what we're being presented with here in terms of this film is a good example of how this work can be done well.
So I'm not from a museum background, but I would say that, I mean, museums are political anyway, whether they engage with activism or not. Because they're making choices about what goes into their institution. That's a political choice, whether they acknowledge it or not. So yeah, and then I think museums have a responsibility to. They are kind of recording of history, and they are not the only recording of history that exists. Obviously, there is the film industry, or that also has a lot of power in choosing what story we choose to tell. But museums have a role to play in defining what those stories should be as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like at the moment, there's a lot of discussion around what museums collect and what should be in museums and what shouldn't be in museums, especially around the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment. And so it's an important time to kind of ask those questions and revisit what it means to be a museum, what it means to have an archive. And I think on the positive side, in terms of museums collecting material like We the People, it gives some of those more fragile archives a home in a more permanent sense. So, for example, with Clovis Salmon's work, he has, hundreds of hours of Super 8 material that needs, digitising. And it's this really important archive of life in Brixton over the past 40 odd years. Similarly, you know, when we did the work with Malcolm, we got material from the gay community that live in Brixton Housing Co-op, and a lot of that material, you know, wouldn't have been seen before people donated material. So to have the opportunity for that to be collected in some way and to be made permanent and seen by a bigger audience is important. So so I think there's a tension between, you know, the role of the museum as a sort of repository and also as a home and as a somewhere that provides a kind of refuge for that material.
And I think that it also touches, and Martin Sall, I would really appreciate your opinion here. It touches upon discussions that Fan has introduced earlier on in terms of social media collecting, activist practice, and you know the sort of and it's relying heavily in the last few years on social media, and the Museum of London has indeed collecting various social media content, not least from Occupy. So Martins, I was wondering what's your idea about this what can museum learn from social practice, and what would you think?
To be honest with you, I think this is a very delicate issue, because I think a lot of people underestimate the power that a museum actually has. Is a place that's supposed to represent history, of course, and history is very subjective, which is why I feel that a lot of activists, especially the Black community, are not a big fan of history. I mean, not just in museums, you see it all the time in just simple things like schools and Black History Month. You're taught a lot about the regular guys like Martin Luther King, but you will never hear about the rest. And I think activism deals a lot with history. So for a place like a museum to deal with activism and social practice, I think it has to be deep-rooted in activism. I think it has to carry the spirit of activism forward quite a lot and not just be selective with choosing to represent forms of activism. So I think it's a complicated issue to touch on, and it's a very delicate issue in my opinion. But that's my stance on it.
Thank you, Martin. I guess one last question. We are in a pandemic. We're going through the midst of a severe pandemic, which is affecting the lives of many. And but as far as this discussion is concerned, I think there is an opportunity for museum to reflect on how social practice is on the work that social practitioners are doing in these times of crisis. Obviously, artists are among the most affected category during this time. So I just was wondering what you guys think about what museum should be or can learn from social practice in times of crisis.
I'm happy to jump in here. One of the things that I feel comes across in the film is that, and answers your question, is the importance of process, and that all of the works that people were doing were part of a continual process that really it's not about an end point. Activism doesn't finish. It doesn't end. And what museums, I think, are generally more accustomed to is being able to collect the singular object that represents the whole. That doesn't work anymore. And we're moving towards really understanding that the process is the work. And we have to rethink how we can collect and archive and show that process, because that's where the power is, because it is part of a continuum that keeps going. And as Maya Angelou has told us, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and others that come after us will stand on our shoulders. And so representing that feels like it's really key, and understanding that's what social practice can bring to museums.
something that Claire, who is in the first conversation, would say in some of the live Q&As that we had last year. She would say, at the time, I didn't know that we were making history. And it's almost like you need the distance of time, and you also need someone else to point out that actually what you're doing here is history and needs to be recorded. And perhaps that's the role that museum can play, because they have the authority to come in and say, this is history and needs to be permanent.
Virginia, do you want to add one last comment? Virginia Martins.
Yes, I do, but there's someone banging outside, so I'm just going to kind of try and... I don't know, can you hear that? Yeah, sorry. Anyway, yeah, I think the idea of participation at the moment under COVID is going to bring up some new issues and some new possibilities, I think, for us to record and to document. So I think the future's open, isn't it? It's like we're meeting on Zoom at the moment. There's going to be new opportunities to make work, to collaborate in ways that we haven't foreseen. So I'm kind of optimistic that it's going to throw up new possibilities and new collaborations, new ways of working with museums, for example. So yeah, I'm hopeful despite the chaos and everything else.
Martins, is there anything that you would like to add to this conversation?
Not really. I feel like everyone has said everything important that needs to be said. So.
That's great, and I totally agree with the last sort of conclusions that all of you have been drawing, particularly around the opportunities that the historical moment gave us to rethink our practices in museum, but also to critically approach this, because obviously digital engagement presents also the risk of replicating inequalities in terms of the digital gaps people might have, which goes from not having a place, a room in their house, because their house a tiny where to have a privacy of an engagement process, or even more banal questions, but nevertheless significant, as bandwidth and things like that. So we will need to be, I guess, a little bit more critical on how we approach the future is coming up. But it's seems to me like a good time for us to wrap up the discussion and to open up to the floor for other questions. As I said, myself and one of the artists will be answering questions, so do please post them and we'll come back to you live. And I just want to thanks all our speakers for their time today. I want to thank Marcelo, I want to thank Fan, Martins and Virginia for their time, and I really hope that the learning of We the People can be beneficial to all people, to everyone that has watched this and will be watching the film. So thank you.
Gonna shout out that I put a link to the meetups that we're doing in London online. So please join us if you're interested. They're free, they're booked. We've only booked them so that we know who's coming, because sometimes topics can be quite sensitive. It'd be nice to see you there. I think you'd be up for it, you'd be interested in it.
And thank you, Marcelo, for your contribution. I think it really helped us to kind of broaden the scope of also of what the context of the film.